Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the Maudsley Trainee Guide to the CASC, which is a new book that has been published by Cambridge University Press and the RCPsych. My name is Norella Broderick. I am a member of the RCPsych Books Committee, and I'm here today with Samantha Perera, Christopher Travers, and Dan Cleall, who are the authors of this trainee guide to the CASC. So thank you all for joining me today. Maybe I can ask you all to introduce yourselves first, if that's okay.
So hi, I'm Samantha Perera. I'm a dual trainee in general adult and older adult psychiatry, and I'm working at Sussex Partnership.
I'm Christopher Travers, and I'm a higher trainee in CAMS, and I'm working in the Great Ormond Street training program.
And I'm Dan Cleall. I'm a higher trainee in forensic psychiatry, and I'm working at the South London Partnership.
Thanks, guys. So we have a great spread of experience there, of specialties. I wonder, could you share some of your own memories about the CASC with us?
So I just remember it being the final exam that we had to do before we attained membership, and it being an exam that we hadn't done for a long time since medical school, because it's a clinical examination. So feeling quite anxious about that. Also, it's the first clinical examination as a doctor, so feeling a lot of pressure that you have to perform and pass this exam. And also, it's a very expensive exam. And yeah, in general, just feeling a lot of pressure that this was the last exam, the final hurdle, really, before you're a proper psychiatrist. But I also remember it being quite a fun time, that you were meeting up with your friends, other psychiatry trainees, practicing whenever you could, either at lunchtime or after work. And it being quite fun, even though it was very nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
For me, my main memory is the sort of sense of the unknown, having not really been able to sort of visualize what the exam was going to be like, with sort of the resources available, relying a lot on speaking to trainees who had already sat it, or consultants involved in the CASC, and trying to get their opinion about what the day's like, what the test centre's like, how it's going to be set out. So for me, it was not really being able to put myself visually there. So I think the sense of the unknown was a big thing for me. Yeah, which is, I think we tried to address that in the book, but yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think my memories were more, I can't so much remember the details on the day, because for me, I was, I guess, I kind of got like a bit in the zone. So I remember vaguely like the midpoint and going for lunch, but I don't remember so much like all the details now of the day. The main memories that I have, which I hope that I'll sort of keep forever, are the bits of practicing. And my experience before then, as like a busy junior doctor, is that it's very hard, especially if a lot of your friends are also junior doctors, to arrange to meet up and do things. Whereas when the exam preparation came around, suddenly that was quite a good excuse for everyone. So we did manage to meet up a lot more, and I really, really enjoyed those times. They're some of the nicest times that I remember.
Excellent, very good. I remember myself, I was traveling to the centre, and I remember my main worry was, where will I go for lunch? And as Dan said, you guys have covered a lot of detail in the book, in chapter 1, about the details of the exam. So from the layout of the room where it's held to what to do for lunch. So it's really, really helpful. I wonder, could you share what was the most helpful tip you guys received before you went for your exam?
I think one of the most helpful tips I had was organising accommodation for the night before. So the test centre in the UK is up in Sheffield. So I suppose unless you live quite close to Sheffield, it would be a long journey in the morning. So being able to relax the night before at accommodation that's quite close to the test centre was really helpful, with settling nerves, and then being able to have time for breakfast in the morning before the exam. So certainly, I mean, that's one of the things I would advise anyone who doesn't live very close to the test site, is to get some accommodation. And there are some affordable hotels quite close to the centre.
Yeah, I'd echo that. That was another one that really stood out for me, that making sure that you sort of, because for me, again, it was that sort of nervousness about the unknown, and I'd never been to Sheffield before. I didn't really know what I was doing, what the transport would be like. I just didn't want to be worrying about that on the day. So that was something I did as well. But probably the biggest tip that I had that I think would have changed how I approached it was I was told if you, in many exams, especially these ones where you're sort of in there and it's a little bit clinical, there might be a moment where you sort of freeze or you get a bit stressed. And if that happens, I was told, rather than sort of, just kind of plow on, to use that moment to like take a bit of a pause and say, either if you've just been asked a question to sort of think about it, if you're in a more interviewee situation, but in the CASC, that's basically a good opportunity to kind of recap what's been said in the station, and then that might remind you what you actually want to say next. So that was really helpful. I think I actually used that at least once on the day. So
very good.
I remember actually when we went up to Sheffield the night before, one of our colleagues said that he had actually walked up to the English Institute of Sport, which is where the exam was being held, just to familiarise himself with the site. So it's just really in a form of desensitisation. So it's just being familiar to that. So then on the day of the exam, it's okay, I've walked to this place before. And actually that was really helpful. So my friend and I did that. And it was just
very good.
Quite creative, I thought, on his part.
Very good. That's all really helpful. So I know from looking through the book that you guys have a particular interest in reaching out to international medical graduates and ethnic minority trainees in particular, and that you have a chapter with particular advice for these groups. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
For me, there's really personal interest. I'm born in the UK to Sri Lankan parents, and I've even been judged by my ethnicity in exams whilst at medical school. I'm going to say that they were impressed with my level of English. And at the time, I didn't think really too much of it, because actually this has been something that I've kind of had most of my life, really, that I've always been, I was born in the UK, but with Sri Lankan parents, I've always been a bit different. And people often asked, where are you really from? And I never felt, certainly where I was from anyway, that it was racism per se. But then when we came to do the book, and it was just glaringly obvious that there was such stark differences between those that were white and those that were non-white, really. So GMC figures showed that white UK graduates were 15.7% more likely to pass the CASC compared to BAME UK grads, so people like me. And that was shocking. And also, I think for all of us, we've seen many excellent IMG clinicians who haven't been able to get onto higher training programs because they just simply haven't passed the CASC, and it's a requirement of higher training programs here that you need to have got full membership with the RCPsych. And again, these figures were even more shocking, that on average 42% of IMG candidates pass the CASC compared to 92.2% of UK grads. And we were really thinking about lots of reasons why, and racism, whether it be unconscious biases or more sort of sinister behaviours, can't be ruled out really as to why rates are so low between non-white candidates and those that are IMG compared to white UK grads. But there are also multiple other factors, and we talked about IMG candidates, we thought about it ourselves, and also people, other consultants that may have examined in the CASC. And there are other reasons, such as poor senior supervision, in particular if you're not on a training program, you may not have access to educational materials. So for us, because we were called trainees, and we were invited once a month actually to have CASC practice, which was brilliant, and also specific educational support for those that are IMG candidates. So things such as just addressing that it must have been really difficult to move to a new country, to work in a new language within a new healthcare system. So we hope our chapter has gone some way into at least highlighting these differences, but also trying to give helpful advice. And actually, we've got a lovely foreword by Dr. Laddie Smith, who's now the Presidential Co-Lead for Race and Equality at the college. And she's written a really beautiful, affecting foreword about her own personal experiences of being a Black psychiatrist, working with, and a UK-born Black psychiatrist working within psychiatry and medicine as a whole. I hope that with this chapter, with the foreword and the way we've designed the book as well, and the content, that it goes some way, at least, into sort of addressing the discrepancies in the CASC.
I think it should, yeah, and I think it should be really helpful for that. Christopher, did you want to come in there? Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I was only going to say, it was as we were sort of looking into the details of it, because we knew for a long time that we wanted to write about it. but it's really, as Sammy had said, that the stats, when you consider that we're talking about, for example, that the discrepancy is greater amongst international medical graduates compared to domestic graduates, so those who trained in non-UK schools versus those who trained in UK medical schools. But there's really very little reasonable explanation that I would think would satisfy almost anyone to think about why there should be any sort of discrepancy between domestic graduates of any ranks. Like there should on average that should all equal out, and it clearly doesn't.
Sure.
And so we looked at Professor Esmail's recommendations, which there'd been a previous review of one of the postgraduate medical exams to look at this specific issue. And there were a series of recommendations that were made in Professor Esmail's review, which we've made reference to in the book as well, and which we also discussed with RCPsych, who we're very grateful that they do seem to be taking it very seriously and making a series of recommendations themselves that they're taking forward. So yeah, we hope that both the stuff that we've written practically in the book to address it and give advice, the sorts of things that Sammy was saying in terms of, senior support, we really flag up how best to access that kind of senior support. And then we've also tied in the sorts of specific things that RCPsych are recommending, because they've made some additional support available, for example, which people might not have been aware of.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's obviously a very novel feature of the book, which is great, and hopefully will be really helpful for those groups or for everybody, really. And I know you were keen to have a book that was up to date. Can you point or tell us a little bit about any other features that you feel brings the book up to date, aside from the one just mentioned?
So at the time of publication, I think this is the first revision aid that takes into account the changes that were made a few years ago to the CASC format, which obviously isn't available at present any of the other resources around. I suppose one area that if we could update it maybe for the next edition would be to be able to talk about the changes that have happened this year. As far as we're aware, temporary changes about the CASC being virtual. Certainly it'd be good to include some experiences from trainees who've had to go through that process.
Excellent. And I think you mentioned it there, but can you tell me maybe a little bit about how you came to choose the topics to cover, maybe particularly in the practice station chapters?
So, I mean, it was a combination of things, really, looking at the curriculum, trying to make sure we cover any possible topics that could come up. Also, again, discussing with a range of trainees who've taken it in the past and consultants who've taken it in the past, to try and sort of survey the different topics and different areas within each different psychiatric subspecialty, and make sure we just try and encompass as many different possible scenarios as realistically would turn up.
So that's great. It sounds like we're covering the curriculum, but also getting a lot of practical tips from people who have gone through the exam. Christopher, sorry, I think I cut you off there.
Now, I was sort of going to come back a little bit to the previous question, because it is one of the things that we discussed with RCPsych about whether they thought that it was likely that the virtual CASC was likely to be a meaningful consideration going forward, and they advised us basically no. So that's why I haven't given a specific section to that. But what we also, I guess, I don't know about fortuitous, but that one of the key things that we wanted to do in the book was to make sure that people could practice in as broad a range of circumstances as possible. So we were obviously fortunate that we were in a relatively large training program. We all went to the Maudsley, so you have quite a lot of access to local trainees, but that's obviously not the case for everyone. So it was one of our big focuses was making sure that as you're using the book, you can use it not just with trained medical peers, but with basically anyone. And that, again, in a pandemic where you're not able to practice so much with physically people nearby, or you don't have as much access to other trainees, that's one of the big features of our book, and we're hopeful that'll make a big difference if heaven forbid there should be another major event around the world that means that, you know, the virtual CASC.
We have to isolate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And actually that brings me nicely on to my next question, which is that you had a really nice section in the preface, Christopher, about friendship and how important that was for you guys, I suppose, between yourselves, but also then in practicing with friends and peers. I guess, why would you find it important to advise people to practice with friends and peers? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for me, I guess that was another big part of why we ended up writing the book. And yeah, there's the three of us here who are, as well as, I guess, writing some of the stations, we're also involved in editing the book, but we're very grateful to our other people. There's a group of 8 of us who were involved directly in writing the stations, and the way that we knew each other was from friendship and from practicing together. And I guess there's sort of a cynical answer to the question, and there's a maybe slightly more wholesome answer. The cynical answer is that if you practice with as many people as possible, you are just much more likely to pass. That's like, that if you've got more people who are able to look at what you're doing, you're going to much more likely pick up the things that would have failed you, if you see what I mean. So, and that again is a kind of big feature, is we really wanted feedback, even if you're practicing with your mum and dad. We really wanted them to be able to give useful, constructive feedback. And so we've designed the book such that anyone can give that feedback, and it should help to pick up anything that probably would have caused you problems on the day. And maybe my less cynical, more wholesome answer is, like, it is also it is much more fun. Like it fit in writing. As I was writing that preface, I thought, was this a bit sort of gushy? But it's just true. Like, when I look back at my time in core training, a lot of those moments were very stressful, and I did not have a stressful experience of preparing for the CASC because it was so social. So I think it's also really important, as you're getting towards something that's going to be one of the most potentially, you know, nerve-wracking experiences you might have, to have a really nice social time for several weeks as you're preparing to do that.
Did anyone else want to come in on that, or does that cover it? Maybe actually I could ask you a little bit more about how you guys came to write the book, because I think that was, you discussed that a little bit at the beginning as well, and it talks about your own kind of friendship through training and so on. So that was also really nice to read.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a nice organic coming together of minds. I remember us three in the on-call room of Maudsley Hospital. It came up in conversation because we were all revising at the time. We were thinking, I bet we could write a revision book that would be really helpful. And we're you know, all in the same position, and we all just kept, I think, in the back of our heads. And then after we'd passed, we came back to it and thought, let's go for it. Let's actually put this into action. So we went around and recruited again some friends who got interested in different particular psychiatric specialties, and put together, you know, a great team, and here we are. So
brilliant. I think the on-call room is where most good ideas come from, a lot of good ideas. And I really like that you guys went from the on-call room and proceeded with your plan to, you know, go ahead and put it together. So that's really great. Well done. Do you guys have any final parting words of wisdom for candidates coming up, aside maybe from buying the book, being sure to buy the book?
I would say, because I'm aware that we were very lucky at SAM, that we had so many trainees there to practice with, that we also had organised teaching sessions with a lot of consultants that were also examiners in the CASC, so they had real experience. And we also had advice from lots of higher trainees as well who'd recently done the CASC. But for those who are in much smaller deaneries, or who actually don't have access to other trainees, or who maybe are less than full time, so they're not with the same cohort, the way we've written the book is that you can practice with friends or family. Because we've tried to write it as clearly as possible, so it's pretty understandable. And so literally just practice with friends and family. It's quite fun for them, and I did that with some of my housemates, and they just found it really fun, just firstly because they got an insight into what we actually do. Like ECT, which actually is pretty mysterious for anyone that isn't working in psychiatry or who's had it as a treatment. They found it interesting. I found it really good for my practice, because there were lots of things that I would say which actually weren't very clear at all. Say, if you can explain ECT to a layperson, you will almost certainly pass a CASC, because it's and hone your skills within 7 minutes, I think you pretty much got it.
Brilliant.
For me, I think it's doing as many different range of states, practicing as many different range of different stations as possible. And I think, I mean, there's over 100 different stations in our book, which you know gives you a really large number of different possible scenarios to go through. And I think if you go through every station in the book, you're really setting yourself up to have a really great chance at passing on your first attempt.
Brilliant.
And for me, I guess, again, slightly cynically / efficiently, I'd say don't put loads of your money and time into things that are not necessarily that helpful. I know that there's a lot of people out there who'll be worrying about whether they need to pay for, there are some very expensive courses and that sort of stuff. And if that's what you want, that's very reasonable. But I guess my experience was didn't use that. And the way that we've designed the book, it is such that you shouldn't necessarily need anything like that. You should be able to, you know, both, I say this as genuinely as possible, enjoy the period of practicing and preparing, and also come out knowing that you're very well qualified to pass the exam.
Brilliant. That sounds great. Thank you all for joining me today, and congratulations on the achievement of this book, which looks great. I hope the candidates will go out and buy it and will hopefully find it helpful. Yeah, thank you again.